All right, we did it. You're on mute though, Greg, but that's all right. If you'll look down on the bottom and you will see erroneously that Greg Baker has been listed as another Mike Stansel, which is the magic trick that we pulled in order to bring him in here today. We really do appreciate everyone's patience, so I'm just going to hand it straight over to Greg and let him kick things off. Thanks, Greg, for being here.
Thanks, Mike. This turned into like from a bad thing to one of the best things that's ever happened because my name got changed. I was like, if I can go a whole recorded session as Mike Stansel, I mean that is just like the gift that keeps giving. But they did their tech magic and got it changed. But hey, sorry all about that. My bad. Zoom and I just were not getting along today. Appreciate you guys making time and staying in there though. Today, if you can go to the next slide, Katie. We'll just jump in. Please feel free again, as we've done the last couple of times, if you have any questions, anything that we can clarify or go deeper on, send us a chat or a Q&A, and we'd like to do that. But the specific three objectives for what we wanted to talk about over the course of now the next, call it 50 minutes, is there's a lot of talk about biosimilars. And I think people just kind of hear biosimilars and generics, and a lot of times these are thrown around, and it's hard to understand what the difference is between biosimilars and generics and what's interchangeable and not interchangeable and how that works between all these different drug classes. So without getting super clinical or geeky, I think we're going to try to really define what a biosimilar is. So as you guys continue to hear these terms, which we will hear more and more in the coming years, it'll make more sense to you on how they work and why they are different from some of these other generic drugs that are in the market today. And then with that comes formulary placement, because the fact that these drugs are called biosimilars, then for sometimes good and sometimes bad reasons, PBMs use that definition in ways that are kind of unique and different to each different PBM. So to know what to look for, what questions to ask, and how to make sure that you are having biosimilars properly defined in your world, I think is going to be very important. And then we're going to end because we also spend a lot of time having people ask us about what's going on with cell and gene therapies. So end with some cell and gene therapy, just very high level stuff, and see again if you guys have any questions around that. As we've talked about through the last two of these webinars that we have had the privilege of doing with Mike and the Pittsburgh Business Group on Health, I think it's always important to start again with the concept of really what is this industry built to do? And with whether it's the manufacturer, the wholesaler, or the PBM, they're all making a percentage of their profit off the revenue of a drug. So in all of their worlds, the more revenue they can get, if they're making 10%, profit off that, the more profit they get. So especially with all of these groups, if the manufacturer can make, the wholesaler can ship, or the PBM can approve a $5,000 drug or a $50 drug, knowing they're going to make 10% off of it, which do they typically like to push forward? And it's the more expensive drug. And while that's great for them and their shareholders, that is completely out of alignment, in our opinion, with really what employers, plan sponsors, and payers really want. And that's they want lower drug costs, not higher drug costs. But again, that directly impacts the profit of these large companies. Then when you consider on the next slide, the fact that we've talked for years and years about this concept of vertical and horizontal integration. So we'll just call it Blue Cross Blue Shield, the insurer on the far left, goes with Prime, who is the PBM, and then they own their own specialty pharmacy. We have been told, for the last 5 years that this will drive down cost and improve quality. I think we very clearly can say costs continue to go up. They're accelerating, not decreasing at that. And quality for the American public on any aspect of healthcare is not improving either. It's going down. So the fact that these companies together are not improving our lives and making it more expensive should make us all question what we're really getting out of healthcare in America. And then again, as we think about these biosimilars somehow being the ability to lower costs and hopefully improve quality at the same time with these lower costs, we're really at the cusp of trying to make that happen. So on the next slide, again, work with me. I swear it won't be this bad. I did really like biochemistry when I was in college, and we always had to draw, all of these little kind of symbols out. But in the world of pharmacy, so really since the inception of the pharmaceutical industry, way back in the early 1900s, with antibiotics, they were always what we call small molecules. So if you think about the size of these drugs, they're not complex, they're not hard to replicate. So then again, like aspirin, aspirin was a brand drug for years. Now lots of people make aspirin, and everybody can call it aspirin because even if you think of a recipe at home, if you have like a three-step recipe to make something with very basic ingredients, it's not hard. Everybody can replicate that, and everybody feels good that, hey, couple ingredients, these 3 steps, it's almost always going to come out and taste the exact same way. So in the world of pharmacy now, we've kind of changed our lingo to talk small molecule and large molecule drugs. So pretty much anything that comes in a pill that we historically know is called a small molecule drug. Again, pretty basic in their overall chemical structure. And then when we think on the next slide about how they make these drugs too, so they make drugs kind of as a two-step process. The first process, which typically happens almost entirely in India, China, sometimes in Japan, a little bit in Eastern Europe, frankly, very seldom in the United States, is that active ingredient of the drug made. So they make these 55-gallon drums full of just the active ingredient of, call it aspirin. And it is pure aspirin in this 55-gallon drug. So again, just making aspirin over and over and over and over again. Well, then they have to get aspirin because you really just need this tiny little bit of aspirin to take it because that's all you need in your body to make it work for you. So then they take these 55-gallon drums, they send it to a different factory called the, in this case, tableting factory. So then they split it up and they add all these other ingredients. So they add the fillers, they stamp it into a tablet. So then you just have a little bit of aspirin, but in a tablet that's, easy for people to take. They then package those up, whether it's in blister packs, right, or packages and send them out. So, these are completely disconnected steps. They happen at completely different facilities. Many of the API facilities make different APIs. Then they send all these APIs to one drug product facility, and they make a bunch of different drug products. So it's this whole industry. But again, it's pretty replicatable. Everybody feels pretty good that it's going to work okay. We've got a lot of experience with it, and it's fine, right? So then as we think biosimilars on the next slide, the chemical size really starts to change. So again, you can see if we talk about, that Dalton is basically kind of the weight of a molecule. They call it number of Daltons. So an aspirin is just 180 Daltons. Human growth hormone, which for years was one of the more complex pharmaceuticals for people to make, I would say up until probably 2008, 2010, trying to put that, if you think of it in the form of a recipe together and get a very replicatable product, that was about 6 times more complicated than aspirin. So doable, but in the form of chemistry, pretty extensively different. We'll then move that forward to monoclonal antibodies or those types of things. That's $150,000. So these are large molecules now, incredibly complex, much more ingredients, many more recipe steps to make them. And then the other thing that makes these things kind of interesting is we think the novel product versus a biosimilar product, novel being the brand, the original brand product. Thanks, Katie, on the next slide. What really matters to these is within this whole huge kind of molecule, you put the molecule in the body, and then these molecules hit what are called receptors in certain places in your body. And if they hit this certain receptor, then it does what it's supposed to do. So many of these products, even though they're these huge complex structures, and you can see in this place from the reference product on the left to the biosimilar on the right, there's 3 kind of places where they would connect to a receptor. So you just need a certain chemical structure, and those little circles have to be the same. They have to be the same kind of distance apart. But then in the grand scheme of the rest of the molecule, you can have some variances in there. So it doesn't have to be exactly similar to the reference product for it to work, but it just has to hit the receptor at the right spot with the right distance and those things. So when we started making these very large molecules, that's where it was really hard for somebody to say, hey, I can replicate this exact thing over and over and over again in the same way that always works, like they would with, say, that aspirin product. So the FDA said, well, it's not really a brand generic thing anymore, right? So it's similar, and it's a biologic because it's not just a chemical. These are biologic molecules as well, which makes very harder to make. But as long as we can say your, standard manufacturing practices are the same, you've got these three receptors in the right spot at the right distance, and you can continue to show through clinical trials that as people take it, it works the same way, we're going to approve it. So, again, very different, very complex things. But then on the next slide, when we think even how you make these, then it gets really wacky, right? Because this isn't just like, hey, let me take a couple chemicals, put them together, drop them in a 55-gallon drug, send it to a tableting facility where they add the fillers and they stamp it into a tablet and ship it out the door. These are actually made typically in live cells. So you have to basically harvest and continue to grow live cells. You have to do it in a way where you can replicate the cells then, and kind of that moving over in a large batch. Then you got to recover a bunch of stuff out of these batches, put it into all of these other fermentation and pull processes, pull out just little pieces of it, and then you got to figure out how you do it in a way where you don't break this very large molecule. Because if you start pulling these things apart in a way where the molecule is going to break, well, it's not going to work because now my three receptor pieces are in a different spot, or you broke them in some way that they're not going to work and hit the receptor the way that they should. So it's just really, really hard. And then the way that you have to sterilize these, because like a pill is easy, like you just put it in a bottle and it sits on the shelf for years. Well, these are typically something that you inject directly into the skin. So then how you sterilize it and then package it in a way where it's stable and then you can ship it, just incredibly complex compared to small molecules. So very hard to make, frankly, just from an overall brand standpoint. Manufacturing process significantly more expensive and complex. And then the ability to replicate that from a reference product to a biosimilar product over and over and over again, it's just really not easy. But these things usually fix some pretty nasty problems that we have. So it's good. But as we do think about biosimilars, they will probably never get to that really inexpensive costs that we see from a lot of the generic pills and small molecules, because of, again, that replicatable and the overall manufacturing is just significantly more expensive for these. And then when we think about on the next slide, thank you, biosimilars, so the Europe has its own kind of FDA, right? So FDA that approves drugs in the United States only approves drugs for the United States and its territories. The I think it's the AUEA is the FDA of Europe. And so they have their own approval processes. They kind of talk to each other, but they make completely different decisions. Biosimilars have been pretty prevalent in Europe for, I would say, the better part of almost the last decade. You can see at the bottom in Europe, they currently have 94 biosimilars approved for use in the European Union, and 34% of their total drug spend goes towards biosimilars. So they went from taking all these really high cost brand drugs, moving to lower cost biosimilar drugs. It's massively decreased spend in Europe, and they see a lot of really good positive benefits out of it. Here in the United States, it's kind of a totally different game when it comes to biosimilars. They only represent 4% of spend. Yes, we have 41 biosimilars approved, but keep in mind as we say that, just this calendar year, we approved 9 biosimilars for Humira alone. So a lot of very recent biosimilars approved, not many of them, frankly, being used, probably not being used or priced the way that they should. So, but we're starting to get some traction in this biosimilar world that hopefully will add some value. Now, again, as we think about biosimilars too, it's not even just how you make the drug, did it get approved, but in our system, where payment is totally different than it is in Europe, then it matters kind of even who controls the distribution of the drug, right? Because from the manufacturer to the distributor, to the wholesaler, to the pharmacy that dispenses it, every one of those steps, there's money involved and you can make money. And so again, back to that, I think our third slide where we talked vertical and horizontal integration, a lot of the reasons why these large companies like adding more companies into the supply chain is because that new company now gets to pull some of the profit out. They're going to make money for the parent organization. And the person at the terminal end of that, which is you guys is typically the payer and your clients, you're having to pay all of these increased profits. So again, we keep hearing that mail order pharmacies and specialty pharmacies owned by PBMs help save money, where the exact data proves opposite, that they're the highest place to get drugs now. So on the next slide, maybe I'm just jaded sometimes with the PBM industry in general, but CVS, I think it was in September of this year, announced that they're launching a biosimilar company, right? Because biosimilars are so important and they're going to drop down costs. And I love in the About Us that every day they work to build an innovative, diverse, world-class team based in Dublin, Ireland. Cool. So they're all in Dublin. There's just tons of, I'm sure, really good biosimilar expertise running around the streets of Dublin, Ireland, knowing that I don't think Ireland has had any biosimilars approved from their country standpoint. Just about all of them have been created and manufactured, of course, in the United States. So our pharma manufacturers are making and approving these drugs. But then there's some group in Dublin that is now owned by CVS. And you can see who we are. This is a wholly owned subsidiary of CVS that works directly only to bring drugs to the US market. So if we're making drugs in the US and then CVS starts a company in Dublin, Ireland to only focus on bringing drugs back to the US, it kind of just doesn't make sense to me, right? Until you take a step back and go, what's CVS's motivation? Oh, that's right, profit. They just want to make as much money as possible. So when they can put a biosimilar company out there that's never going to make anything, right? Their first product, they partnered with Sandoz, the manufacturer, and they're just using Sandoz product within the course of this company to then put it into the wholesale system that CVS owns to then sell to CVS mail specialty and retail pharmacies. It just makes absolutely no sense. And it just, to me, shows how we continue to try to find ways to create new pools of profits for PBMs, again, always at the detriment of the American corporation and family. So these are not good things. And then again, why they have to be domiciled in Ireland is just a very obvious tax play, in my opinion, because Ireland has the lowest corporate taxes of any country, any civilized country, I would say, that some companies would go to. So, this is all just about money, and it has nothing to do with decreasing costs or improving patient care. And then to even layer in a little bit more from a CVS standpoint. So from a Humira perspective, which Humira has been the number one selling drug in the world for, I think, the last 13 years in a row. First drug ever in its entire product run to do over $200 billion in sales. So just massive product, tons of spend on Humira. And then the first biosimilar that came out to it was a biosimilar called Amjevita. We'll talk here in a couple slides, but interestingly, Amgen was the first biosimilar company, either a drug manufacturer, Amgen, to make Amjevita. Amgen also makes Enbrel, which is a branded product, which is, of course, the number one competitor to Humira, because Humira and Enbrel have really owned and dominated this space for like the better part of the last decade. So AbbVie makes Humira. Amgen, then the manufacturer, makes Enbrel and the biosimilar Amjevita. So when you think back to the manufacturing it takes to get these products out there and the scientific expertise to do it, it kind of makes sense that Amgen would be the first one to really figure out all those things and bring it to market. But then when they brought it to market, they went to the PBMs and said, hey, we can really lower the cost of this and we can bring it to market 55% below as we call it, the WAC cost of Humira. So in this slide, we're showing, you can see Humira for this particular CVS client was about $6,700. So, if we just brought it out without a rebate, because rebates aren't always the best thing, but that's just to people like us, that would save about $3,700. So this product should cost you about $3,000 with no rebate. Well, Amgen was running around telling the PBMs this, and the PBMs were like, well, I don't like a non-rebatable drug. So why don't you then bring out what you call a high WAC, high rebate product? So then instead of just having one Amjevita out there, which is a low WAC product with that massive discount, they also brought out a high WAC product, so an expensive Amjevita, and then Amgen is having to pay a bunch of rebates on the back end for this product. So you can see we couldn't even find the lower cost Amgevita anywhere, because if you search Amgevita, we can only find the $6,300 cost of Amgevita. And again, you can compare that to that almost $6,700 cost of Humira. This is clearly the high WAC version. And then what employers are being told and plan sponsors is, well, yeah, but we're getting a big rebate on it. Okay, well, and if that was actually the case, where that rebate then was paid from the manufacturer to the PBM, and all of those monies were given to you, to get down to about that same, $3,000 level that we should have been at with the low Amgevita in the first place. That's great, but nobody on this call will ever get a rebate check that says, hey, you had a patient on Amgevita, you spent $6,278. Here's a $3,278 rebate check specifically for that patient. Bring your cost to $3,000, which then matches what would have been on the low WAC Amgevita. Like, that doesn't exist anywhere. And so it's all a rebate game. If they're getting over $3,200 in rebate every time one of these Amgevitas are filled, and they can keep hundreds of dollars and just pass the rest of that on to you, employer, they can continue to say, look, we're using our size and scale to give you these thousands of dollars to buy down your costs, but they're keeping a bunch of it on the back end. Last thing I want to point out, which is, in our opinion, very dangerous when it comes to these decisions on drugs like going with a higher cost Amgevita, is if you are on a high deductible or co-insurance plan, like you can see is happening here, the patient's cost is still incredibly high. So, in this situation, because they went with the $6,300 Amgevita, the member had to pay $1,883 out of pocket, which, how many of your employees can afford that in the first place? Not many. Amgevita doesn't have great manufacturer assistance. So if, they were on this brand Humira, doctor switches them to a biosimilar to save money. One, it's not really saving them money. Two, it's not really saving them hardly any money at the drug counter, where, again, at a lower cost, the low WAC Amgevita, that should be about $600, which is significantly more affordable than the $1,800. I mean, 600 is still really high in our opinion, but at least it might be in the realm of possibility for more and more people. So as you think about these biosimilars, we've really seen the market play out where PBMs do not want low-cost biosimilars. They want high-cost biosimilars, like in this Amgevita case, where they can still get rebates, manipulate rebate games on the back end, and then they want to put in distribution channels like we saw in the last slide, where they can make even more and more profit. So if we allow these things to continue in America, we might get up to the European level of number of approved biosimilars. We're never going to get the savings that they see because of how our drug pricing mechanism works with these rebates driving to bad decisions. So anytime you're talking to anybody associated with your PBM, if they say, hey, we're doing a good job, we've got these biosimilars on formulary for you, ask which biosimilar, and we'll have a list here a little bit later you can reference. Is it the high cost or the low cost biosimilar? And if it's the high cost, I want to start seeing my rebates at the claim level that proves I'm getting everything I should. And this high cost drug is the same after rebates that I would be paying with the low cost. And oh, by the way, from a benefit design standpoint, am I doing things that cost my employees then at the pharmacy counter because that high cost drug was approved? I know that was a whole lot of high, low cost, low WAC, high WAC, but hopefully at the end of the day, it made sense. We can, as we get to the end, if you have any clarifying questions about that, please let us know. But last, I will point out, throw all that out, whether it's high or low WAC Amgevita, the other reality is, through our relationship with Mark Cuban and his Cost Plus drug company, one of the 9 approved Humira biosimilars is a product called Usemry. And you can buy that for $584. No rebate, just nothing. It's the lowest cost Humira biosimilar out there. And nobody wants to use it, because why would you want to have a $584 drug that doesn't have rebates and is even significantly less expensive if you get all the rebates or even use the low WAC versions versus these other products? So things like that continue to prove to us the market does not want to improve. The market does not want to drive down costs. And here are some really bad things that continue to play out in the market. To that end, last slide to really drive home the Humira biosimilar. Here's the list of all of the biosimilar products that are approved currently on PBM formularies today. So we went out and looked and said, well, we can see CVS's formulary, Optum's formulary, Express Scripts formulary, and which drugs they're approving. So we put an X next to the drugs that are currently on PBM's formulary. The drugs that don't have an X next to them are not on any PBM's formularies. So notice anything outside of brand name Humira at $7,000? Pretty much all of the X's are next to drugs that are about $6,500 WAC or more. I mean, poor even low WAC Amgen at $3,000. I mean, nobody can even get that sucker on formulary, which Amgen doesn't necessarily care, right? Because at least you're using their high WAC version, so the expensive drug. But you know, that Biocon drug, nope. Coherus drug, nope. Samsung Organon drug, nope. Why would anybody want that Sandoz one for $1,315 when you can use the Sandoz one for $6,576? So again, it's really, really important. Biosimilars do have a really good opportunity to save money for Americans, but the way that the system is working, it's not allowing that to happen at this moment in time, and that's dangerous. Next slide, please, Katie. So then to get really kind of boring and technical, and I swear this is my last biosimilar slide, and then we're going to go to the exciting world of cell and gene therapies. Keep in mind whether it's pricing guarantee or rebates. So whenever you're working within the context of hopefully your consultant conversations or with your PBMs directly, it's going to be really important to understand how the financials go for these drugs. Because as you just saw in the last slide, pretty much every biosimilar that's approved on a PBM formulary today is the highest cost biosimilar, which means they all come with high dollar rebates. So what we've seen directly in some employers' contracts, which you can see under this top box where it says rebate language, 1.3 exclusion. So this is, we cut this directly out of a PBM contract with a public employer, which is a very large one, but this is probably the same type of language that occurs in a lot of your contracts. So when they say, here's what we pay rebates on, was in section 1.1 and 1.2, but then 1.3 section, which is all we cut out. But if you wanted to see the rest, we could show it to you. There's nothing to hide, but just to make it easier to read. So what is not paid for rebates, you can see is member submitted claims, you know, these things, biosimilar products. Oh yeah, like, you know, and people read that and say, oh yeah, they're lower cost biosimilars, you shouldn't pay a rebate on them. Well, unless you pick all the high cost, high rebate biosimilars. So in this case, then the PBM literally gets to keep those thousands and thousands of dollars that they're getting in rebate biosimilars and not pass them to you, because that is expressly excluded from your rebate contract. Really, really bad. But then even when you flip down to the pricing guarantee, the other reality is, you know, there is a little bit better discount even on the high cost biosimilars, but even if they do use the lower cost biosimilars that come at a big discount, then that still falls under their pricing guarantee, right? Because within typical employer contracts, you know, you're going to say, hey, I get an 85% discount on generic drugs, a 20% discount on brand drugs, and say 17% discount on specialty drugs. And then the PBM says, within all the specialty drugs that we dispense, we'll just guarantee you this 17% discount off the list price of the drug. So if they use like a Usimry, which has like an 86% discount, they're just going to say, well, hey, but I'm going to use this 86% discount. I'm going to drop it into the 17% specialty discount guarantee. And that gives me a lot of ways to create more profit for myself. And so it's really important to really look at, hey, how are they defining these products? What discount am I getting? What rebate am I getting? Because on the pricing guarantee one at the bottom, and I know we talked about this one in our last session too, but I think this is the literally dumbest thing, but it's lawyers are sometimes pretty smart and make things sound good when in reality they're really bad. So the very last sentence at the bottom of this says, in addition, a biosimilar or generic product will be considered a specialty drug if the innovator drug is a specialty drug. So really what that language says is, so Humira is a brand drug. Amgen is a biosimilar for Humira. I'm going to call both of them a specialty drug if Humira is a specialty drug. What? Well, duh. But then they can put it all in the same, high cost specialty bucket, because nobody has a brand specialty or generic specialty bucket really, which you should have, or at least a brand and a biosimilar specialty bucket, and really put those things out there at an individual drug level to make sure that you're getting the best possible deal. But again, that language kind of sounds good, right? Like, oh, good, I have biosimilars in there, and innovator drug sounds super cool and exciting. So sure, that works for me, but that's really bad for you if you have that contract language. So not the best thing. Next slide. So cell and gene therapies. This is definitely a crazy world. And the reality is, a lot of these products we've been talking about, I think, in the national narrative for about 2 years. I think we're going to hear more and more of these. Basically, if you think back to when we were talking about how you make a biosimilar product through kind of that like lazy river, as I would call it, of a manufacturing cycle and how hard that was, these things are clearly even harder. Many of these actually, they take either bone marrow or other parts out of the patient, send it to a lab, they match the cell or gene therapy exactly to your DNA, send it back and have it injected back into you. Some of these products then too, once they put it back into you, you're looking at up to a 2-month inpatient hospital stay, because it changes the genes within your body and causes, of course, a lot of crazy things to happen. So they have to monitor you really closely. But these are the things that, hey, psoriatic arthritis is a really bad and terrible thing, but spinal muscular atrophy in a 2-year-old who's going to die when they're 12 is an even worse thing. And many of these cell and gene therapies are curative. So Humira, you have to take that every single month for the rest of your life. And yes, it's really expensive. Towards the bottom, you can see one of the products called Zolgensma. You take Zolgensma once before your 2nd birthday, it cures you of your spinal muscular atrophy. So instead of having an absolutely horrible short life that is just catastrophic to, patient and family, frankly, we'll give you this, we'll keep you in the hospital for a couple of weeks. Theoretically, you leave and you're completely cured. You live an absolutely normal life. And we're going to charge you $2.1 million just for the cost of the drugs for this. So, these are really bad diseases that we're actually curing typically through these cell and gene therapies. It's very, very small patient populations, so that the drug manufacturers, their kind of math is still, I probably spent between $1 and $2 billion in research and R&D to bring Zolgensma to market. I know at best, or worst, I should say, right? Not at best, but at most, call it, you're going to have 750 patients a year. So if I treat all 750 patients a year, I just spent billions of dollars to bring this to market. How much do I need out of each of these therapies to break even? And then obviously at some point in time, try to turn a profit on them. So, it's just this really crazy world. Our general overall contention, frankly, is that the payment mechanisms for healthcare as they exist today are not at all set up for these ultra high cost, ultra low volume therapies that we're seeing in cell and gene. So at some point, we're really going to have a national conversation about how we pay for these. The reality is they're kind of like the reverse lottery, right? That the chance of having one of those 750, annual spinal muscular atrophy babies get born within your patient population is minuscule. But if it does, it's really harmful to the plan health, just with the costs associated with it. So, again, there's going to be a real big balance on how we do that. You can see FDA has 29 of these therapies approved as of middle part of this year. The pipeline has over 1,000 more coming. By 2025 alone, FDA thinks 10 to 20 of these things a year are going to be approved. So when you consider in the next 5 to 7 years how many of these therapies are going to be out there, the costs associated with them, and then how we really try to pay and finance these as a healthcare system, there's a lot of things we still need to figure out. And to the payment point on the next slide, there's an annual report of a bunch of actuaries. I don't even remember. You can see in the kind of bottom left, TMHCC. It stands for a bunch of words that I can't pronounce as a non-actuary. But they looked at this and they said, hey, if you really look at, kind of what a per employee per month cost across all of these cell and gene therapies could be, they really think even through the course of 2023, this report came out middle part of 2022, we're going to go from about a $3 PMPM to potentially a $12 PMPM, or sorry, PEPM, per employee per month cost, on these cell and gene therapies. And then what does this look like in the coming years as we get more and more and more of these things approved? On the next slide, just if you want, and maybe not the most helpful thing because A, it's really small, B, it's a bunch of very hard words to understand, but it does talk about FDA status, so you kind of know if it's, people talk a lot phase 1, phase 2, chemical review of these. Phase 3 means they're in the last phase before they come out for approval. Those very top ones in the upper left have gone through phase 3 and they're at the FDA review, which means FDA is likely getting ready to approve these. The top 2 there on the upper left are both for sickle cell in that FDA approval process. Since this chart got printed, the top one has been approved. It is now available in the market for sickle cell. So where, a lot of the cell and gene therapies were maybe for 1,000 people or less a year, there's over 100,000 people in America with sickle cell disease. They live pretty painful lives. It's just a really nasty disease. Mostly impacting African Americans, disproportionately so. And if you have sickle cell disease, you spend a lot of money just, within the healthcare system, and it has a negative impact on your life. But this is a $3 million product. So cures you of your sickle cell, makes your quality of life better, but who's going to pick up the $3 million tab for all of these folks with sickle cell? So, again, it's going to be really interesting, challenging to see the conversations that we really need to have to get these drugs approved out in the market. Not to sound any rosier on the next slide, if we look at some more projections, just saying, hey, probability of a plan with, call it 2,500 members, based off of how we're looking at the current FDA pipeline, having to pay for one of these drugs, well, 2024 next year, you got about a 1 in 100 chance if you're 2,500 members on your plan. That same plan in the next 5 years probably is going to be looking at a 1 in 10 chance of that. So still 1 in 10, but odds every year after that are going to continue to get worse. And you can see for the jumbo employers, even at the bottom by 2029, I mean, it's 50-50. They've got a really good chance. So if you got, Microsoft and Disney, one of those is definitely going to have it. Like, that's just how it's going to be by that time. So, we're going to see a lot more proliferation of these really high cost drugs. So, and then as we think on the next slide about how these are getting paid for, again, carrier fully insured would pay for it. But then when you think about, they're saying, hey, we've got these smaller groups who are usually the ones who are fully insured. We're charging them $1,800 per each employee on the family plan right now. But like, if one of these people gets a $2.4 million drug that legally I have to pay for, that's bad. So we're just going to jack the family plan cost up for all of these fully insured members to $2,200 a month, because we've got to kind of insure our risk against that. So the fully insured people, yeah, it's going to be covered, but their insurance costs continue to explode, frankly. Self-funded is significantly different. We're really seeing kind of 3 things start to emerge from a payment mechanism standpoint. One, if you think kind of a stop loss type thing, where employers are covering either a per employee or per member per month fee just to cover a specific gene therapy. Maybe you've heard the term lasers too, where they're lasering in and say, hey, for this patient on this drug, we're going to insure it up to $500,000. So the self-insured plan knows that they're going to cap their risk on this certain thing at $500,000. And then if it's a $2.1 million Zolgensma charge, then the stop loss carrier has to pick up the rest of the costs associated with that. So that's one type. I don't think that's the best option. So if you think about how they price those things, when they come up with either the per employee or per member per month charge, they bring in an actuary, right? And the actuarial model is always based off of historical information, right? Actuaries like saying, okay, what happened last year, the year after, the year after, the year after, the year after that? Okay, now that I know what's happened over the last 5 years, the demographic of the population, growth of the population, that now I can start making some guesses on what's going to happen next year, the year after, and the year after. But you need that historical data by which to make a really accurate actuarial model. Well, again, we have no history on these cell and gene therapy products, right? So the actuaries don't have anything to really say, here's probably what happened in the past, so I can guess what's going to happen in the future. So not only because they don't really have that past to guess the future, they're kind of being asked to guess the future. And then they're like, well, we could be totally wrong on this. So just, I don't know, increase everything we just told you by 25%, and at least we've got that fudge factor built in. So there's very likely a lot of fat built into these type of stop loss models, not saying that they're doing it wrong, but they're just trying to say, the model for actuarial analysis doesn't work here. What's the best way as a company we can do it, but do it in a way where hopefully we don't take on a bunch of risk and have to pay way, way more than we bring in. And that's the way they do it. Other thing then is a full carve out. So again, just another per employer PM, full risk, no deductible to satisfy. This is obviously a clearly higher cost, but it kind of think is a risk pool. So, hey, I'm going to drop all my employees into a combined risk pool. Within this risk pool, then we've got all of these lives paying in. And then if 2% of those people end up having to pay, hopefully the bucket of money in the pool covers the cost of those. Then over time, the amount paid in or out will kind of fluctuate around these risk pools. But it's one way to at least try to pull your risk with other groups and do it in a fully carved out way. So again, if you get a Zolgensma patient, hey, you've already paid, you don't have to worry about these crazy excess costs. And if you've got even a couple thousand employees or less, in the grand scheme of things, it might not be a terrible decision, but you still have the same kind of funky actuarial model happening as they try to come up with these costs. What I say medium, large, maybe not jumbo employers, because when you get to like that Microsoft level where they're already paying over $1 billion a year in healthcare, for them to get nailed with a $2 million Zolgensma, like they don't even notice it. Like, I mean, okay, so an extra 2 million, yeah, that happens. But guys that don't have that cost, they might say, hey, I've got 20,000 employees. I don't want to put 20,000 employees into either that stop loss or the fully carved out model where I've got to play a PE or PMPM model. But I don't want to just take that whole risk if I get hit with a $2.1 million Zolgensma and yank 2.1 million off my balance sheet today. Like that really hurts too. So some companies are being stood up. And think of this as a mortgage, right? It's collateralized risk obligation is really what it's called. So you've got especially a bunch of bankers in New York. And what they would do is they would go to, say, that 20,000 employer group and, say, hey, you've got a $2.1 million Zolgensma. You don't want to take the full financial risk off your balance sheet today. I'll do a 5-year loan, 10-year loan for it. And then you can balance the cost of that out. Of course, you pay, 6% interest on it. But that way you can kind of spread it out like buying a vacation home, I guess, right? Because the concept hopefully is you don't buy a new vacation home every year. So you're not going to need a loan every year for that vacation home. If you got hit with a Zolgensma patient this year, knock on wood, hopefully then that decreases your risk for having any more of these bad things happen downstream. And then you can spread that risk out again through these collateralized risk payments. So we continue to see that kind of perpetuate in the system.
Hey, Greg, we've had a question come in and it just says, can a group choose to exclude all gene therapy?
You can, yes. Yes, you can. We see groups, and it's a hard decision. We can get out of the morality of the conversation at some point in time, but some groups just exclude all specialty drugs too. So yes, the plan can do that. The one thing I would say, you always have to do it at the start of a plan year. During the course of the plan year, you can't have what's called negative changes, but at the start of the plan year, you can do that. Thanks, Katie. So you guys were probably like, thank God he was 10 minutes late, so I didn't have to hear 10 more minutes of cell and gene therapies and those other things. But, we did, again, talk about what biosimilars are, how formulary placement matters on those, and then did what I would say a very shallow dive into the world of cell and gene therapies. What other questions or clarifying comments can we make to help you guys within what is a pretty complex area, but hopefully you feel a little bit better about it as you move forward. All right. Well, again, let that percolate. I know that handouts will be out there. As you guys hopefully don't, but coming months, years, if anything hits you and you're like, hey, let's reach back out to those guys and ask some questions. We're always here to further support outside of even these specific webinars.
Well, thanks, Greg. And then also it's important for everyone to remember that, these are recorded. They're going to be posted on the PBGH portal. So if you want to go back and revisit them and watch certain areas, oh, it looks like we had a question come through. But they'll be available for you to review for more questions here. The question is, I read where you were going to discuss evaluating Vivio and Archimedes. Yeah.
Yeah, Michael, we have done that in the past. Sorry, we didn't do it this time. If you have specific questions, we can definitely go through those later. We've done that historically for other things. We thought as we got into this one, it might be better to go through some of the cell and gene therapy stuffs instead. But if we can answer any of those questions, let us know.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for attending this third part of our series. Greg, thank you so much. And Katie, thank you so much for joining us and running the slides. We really appreciate your time. Again, please feel free to review the videos. If you have any questions, reach out to us, or you can reach out to AffirmedRx and talk with them as well. Thank you, everybody. Hope you have great holidays and Happy New Year's if we don't speak to you before then. Have a great day.